morning. I'm Robert Larson, a retired professor of theater at Luther College, and sitting to my left are three articulate, strong, independent women who have been involved in what has been labeled issues of color. It's more than black and white, the notion about an embodied dialogue. So I'd like to have you introduce yourselves this morning.
My name is Christie Owens, and I graduated Luther 2016 with a major in dance and a minor in music. And right now I am a yoga teacher as well as a performing arts teacher for an elementary school in South Minneapolis.
I'm Colleen Oster, and I am a Luther alum. I graduated in 2014 as a dance major at Luther. And since then, I continued my education, and I have a master's of creative practice from London. And I have been spending my time developing networks and connections in the cities as a dancer and working on collaborations.
My name is Asha Aden. I'm still here at Luther. I'm a junior political science and religion major, and I'm from Rochester, Minnesota.
And Asha and I were observers last evening at a performance where the two of you and two others performed as part of this embodied dialogue that was going on. So perhaps you can give us a bit of a background. How did you get involved with this process?
Well, we got involved with this process through Jane Hawley. So it's informed by her directography. Do you want to say more on that?
Yeah, so we were given 9 segments that were scores, and we were able to work off of that material to develop our duets. Before we began this, Christie and I helped work on a grant with Jane, and that was a very exciting process. We were online. Well, you had given some feedback to her, and I also remember I was online as like midnight was approaching and just watching Jane work and put together this proposal for issues of color. It's more than
So when you saw that, Colleen and Christie, maybe you have been one of the more initiative persons on this project. What was bubbling up underneath when you talk about here's a embodied dialogue about issues of color? So what did that mean to you? What is that? What is that framework? How did you respond to that?
What was bubbling up for us in terms of us beginning or igniting this process? Well, Colleen, myself, Jane, and other alumni from Luther College have been on an endeavor of revisioning Jane's nonprofit, Black Earth Collaborative Arts. So a lot of that came from a desire to make, co-create, and then perform. And for me, in terms of like, especially being a dancer in the cities, and it's such a diverse place, that was really what ignited this process, I would say, for me.
I think it was so we worked on this the scholarship, and then there was this period of waiting, and then the project came through, and we all were given the task of finding a partner, a person who is a person of color or a person who is white, to partner with for this. And I sat on that for a long time, and I had some discussions with friends, because using your body as an object or as a metaphor, as a representative, felt very important to me, but also very powerful, in the sense that I needed to know like why I was here and go about it in a way that felt conscientious. So I had a lot of like anxiety and apprehension around beginning with the embodied dialogue, and part of that is I also don't know a lot of people of color where I'm living currently, and I think that kind of speaks to having very small communities, and I had to sift through that a little bit, and some of it was, what can I be doing to make sure that I am broadening my community and who I'm engaging with, because I'm looking to change what I'm doing. The other part of me was recognizing that I'm a human being who recently moved to Minneapolis, and it takes me time to establish connections and relationships. So if I'm going to go out and meet new people, I also need to make sure that I'm doing it holistically, if that makes any sense.
How would you say you got rid of those tensions you were fighting that you were talking about?
I wrote this email for Jane, and I never sent it. And I talked with some friends who were more educated than me around this content. And then I started to do some self-education, and I printed out articles, and I have like a binder at home of, because I'd never went through any like professional schooling, so I was like, okay, I like to learn that way, so let's give that to yourself. So I started to read articles, and that was nice because it was like private spaces to work through. And then this project was getting closer and closer, and I was like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable. I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable. I just have to do it. I just have to ask someone to be my partner. For me, I need to know that I've asked someone, that I've put myself out there, that I've made myself uncomfortable, that I've fumbled through the conversation of, hey, so there's this dance piece, and I'd like to bring you into it, and I have a lot to tell you about it before we even begin. And I also don't want to tell you about it because I want to engage with you around it. Yeah.
Wonderful. During last night's question and answer session, I think the first question is, what does dance mean to you? And I thought you had a pretty interesting answer when you said healing. And I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so my whole journey as a person has been really doused in like cycles of chronic illness and autoimmune disorders. So when I was 9, I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and before that I was doing like, you know, tap, jazz, ballet from ages like 3 to 9. So when I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, I left school for a while, you know, wasn't able to engage in dance, PE, that kind of thing. And then in junior high school, I also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so my knees started dislocating. So in junior high school, I started getting more immersed in theater and music as well. So by the time I got to high school, my knees were just still dislocating, and I was still sick, but I did a lot of theater and music. So by the time I got to Luther, I was a theater major and a music major, and then I just discovered the dance curriculum, and I really feel like through the dance curriculum at Luther, was able to come back into myself and like what that means, and even navigating issues of color for me. Like, I knew that like I have doctor's restrictions because I'm recovering from surgery now. You know, I'm not kneeling, I can't share contact, I can't jump. So we really had to like the whole experience, dance in itself and dancing with another person, for me was very healing. And in terms of, you know, thinking about the body holds our trauma. One of the most powerful ways to confront and move through the trauma is through movement. So I feel really lucky to be able to immerse myself with healing and movement in an academic and in practice and teaching and performative sense.
So that's a continuing journey for you,
It's
right?
definitely a continuing journey.
So let's talk for a minute about, okay, so you unpacked these sort of layers you were going through, Colleen, you know, in terms of your whiteness in a way, you know, meeting people of color, and you two knew each other. So here you are, now you're together, and you're starting the process. So how did you begin? What was the first few rehearsals like, and what drove it?
Well, the first few rehearsals, we went to the directography, and that was a great source. And I
You
think
want to explain what that is to perhaps
Oh,
someone
sure,
who
sure.
maybe is not as familiar with that terminology?
the directography that Jane made is based off of her witnessing and observing her sons playing and then writing the movement that they're doing. So each line in the directography, there are 9 sheets that have, I don't know, maybe like 8 to 9 lines. It'll say embrace, turn 2 times. It's different ways of like relating to your partner, basically.
Right.
So we took the directography, but what we didn't do was actually talk about issues of color initially. So that made our process challenging. So I had to be like, I can't do this without talking about it. So that really informed, I think, the real beginning of our process, which ended up being story exchanging, actually. Do you have anything else?
I'm trying to reframe the
Yeah.
question again. So the question was.
Well, in terms of just your process, here
Yeah.
the two of you are now in the studio working together,
Yeah.
and you're unpacking the directography, but you're also unpacking other things too, correct?
Yeah.
You know, about who we are, and who you are, and who you are, and how. So, was it revealing? Did more discoveries were made for each of you in terms of the process? And how did you decide, okay, we'll do this part of the score and that part of the score? It's complex.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the night that we started connecting more, it was an evening rehearsal, and we were using the space that was set aside for like our entire Black Earth collaborative arts group, and it was just us in the space, and needing to not move actually, and so we were just looking at, and that's where we started discussing, and we went away with like no material, with this approaching deadline, and yet a conversation, and I felt good about that. Felt like a nice new beginning. And then from there, we moved our rehearsals to the morning, because morning's a lot easier time to move. And we honestly started by smoking a bowl and connecting that way, and then we went into the studio space and we closed the door, and we created a safe space.
And we asked for what each other needed,
Mm.
honestly. Because I was like, my bones hurt at the nighttime. I gotta do mornings. And Colleen's like, this is my work schedule and mornings are good too. So I think I feel like asking for what we need helped to make make the process flow easier. Yeah.
I saw the beginning of your performance yesterday. You both were holding hands. Is that part of the process of like creating a safe space between each other, or?
I was feeling like the need to connect to Christie before we performed, because I wanted to be in sync a little bit, like with breath specifically. And also, I really wanted to see your eyes. There's something about settling into, like, we're about to perform. It's exciting. There's a lot of adrenaline, and I need to see you for this performance.
Something that I also really appreciated that sentiment. Touch is so vital, and breath is too. So I think that's something grounding that anybody could do. Something that for me came up during our process was like, and it's something that you touched on briefly, but like, you have an MFA yet you had no interaction with the content, and I feel like sometimes I can be working with people that are like qualified up the wazoo, yet have no way of like handling and grasping the content and knowledge and questions about issues of color. So for me, I feel like there was a certain amount of like, it's my job to be and not my job to educate honestly. And that's how I feel, working with, I don't know, actually I didn't really feel that way with Colleen because I feel like educating was just exchanging, but generally, like in terms of like people of color doing the emotional labor so that white people can come into more like informants, to me was just something that felt self-sacrificing. So that was a thing that came up for me in the process too.
And I think I would say I learned a lot from you. And part of it is that openness to share. And like what we kind of came down to is like, we had to say what was true for us. And there are moments where I'd be like, that's a really great idea. Christie, I need to talk through something though, because like I need to make sure that it aligns with like who I am and what my experience is. So like the last dialogue is talking about Angela Davis and me not knowing that it was going on, and that was true for me. And so there's some element of like, if I'm speaking my truth, one, I feel a lot better portraying that because it's personal and it's real for me, as well as I don't think I'm the only, like then like in a performance as someone who's embodying something bigger, I think it's also true that my truth is going to be shared. So every time you communicated and opened with me, I did learn, and sometimes I was learning Christie, who Christie is, and sometimes I was learning things that I didn't know.
Do you see this? I mean, that's very very insightful. Do you see this template as something that you would like to have others experience by this embodied dialogue? You're really talking about embodied dialogue that's within your soul and your physical being. So how do you perceive this might be used elsewhere? Not used, but for others, dancers, movers, musicians, those of us just on the street, to experience this kind of dialogue. I mean, that's a tough question.
Yeah. Well, I think me and Colleen are both very inspired to carry this, like our duet, as well as just like offering what we are learning. For me specifically, because our process was like about every card that we did, I had a story that directly related to it. So like, for me.
So if you had a card, explain again what the card would say.
Yeah, so the card, I would pick like one word that stood out to me. So one word that stood out was, what was the arm one?
Place?
It was another one.
It was,
Your arm comes out. It was something about like sticking your arm
yeah,
out.
arm out to the side. It was something very direct.
Suddenly
Yeah,
you
it was
saw
something
that.
really direct, and it triggered me on a personal level, and it made me think about an experience that I had at a coffee shop where I was recovering from surgery. I needed to balance my arm on the counter, and two white women behind me started, talking smack because, oh gosh, my arm, you can't see the pastries, oh no. So that went into a whole dialogue about me needing to take up my space as a person of color because everyone's entitled to take up the space that they hold in their physical bodies. So I mean, stuff like that, Do you have any?
Yeah, I think what I would like to add is that we were having these difficult conversations, and then we were going into the directography, and that's a space where we were able to be creative and playful, and that's something that our strengths and interests already. So that's where it was kind of like this nice little breath. It was like we've had this really beautiful conversation, connection, truth telling, and then we're in our bodies, and we're, oh, that's a good idea. Or like, oh, what about that? Oh, that definitely works. Like, it was always affirming more of what we wanted, it felt like. And then then something else would happen, or we'd finish a little bit of a movement idea, and we'd be like, well, what happens next? And go back to the directography. And so something about that playfulness of like having these conversations and then being in your body and playing a little bit more, like it felt playful, is really, I think, important for embodied, like I think embodied dialogue is very important considering that like conversations are difficult. And I think that I notice tension builds and like patterns of holding. And if I'm holding, what am I holding? My physicality, but am I holding on to a belief? Am I holding on to an idea? And the movement helps change, and for me that also helps me process. So I value that personally, and again, like speaking my truth, and my belief now, you know, like I believe that I'm not going to be the only person where that might work, and might even aid conversation so that it's not all discussion and based in language.
I would also add, like, for me, it was not difficult. It was nice to tell my stories, to be quite frank. So, like, the way that I see this offering happening in whatever partner sharing, storytelling way that we offer it to a community of people, I think on one hand, like, the person who is white is probably gonna find it difficult. And I think that because people who have pain want to heal from it, and because storytelling is a way to have that pain heard and healed, it's also healing. So maybe it's difficult in healing, you know? I guess that would be my takeaway.
I was hoping both of you guys could touch on the four, I think you said 4 stories you had told last night in your dances. And an interesting observation I made was that it was either Dr. King or Dr. Angela Davis speaking, but she or he had said something that was like really gut-wrenching, and then that's when you like did the movement that like hit your gut. And I thought that was interesting because you did it first, and then Colleen was watching you, and after you did it, Colleen followed. So maybe I don't know if that was random or.
Well, when I went to listen to Angela Davis, what happened was a woman who was sitting on my left, she happened to be white, and she could see better than I could. So she offered to switch places with me so I could see. And in this huge auditorium, I think it was even bigger than an auditorium, but it was a huge place where Angela's speaking, balconies on balconies on balconies, so many people. Sorry, I'm kind of losing track of your question here. But I think what we were trying to evoke, or at least what I was thinking about, is like, white bodies and black bodies listening to that kind of thing are going to react differently. I think that's really what I was getting at. Witnessing the witnesser, I think, is super powerful.
In the score, we didn't respond until, like, the idea was to respond to the words and then move to a place of, it was to respond and be really connected to what you're hearing, and then move to a place where you're moving for the movement's sake, that you're keeping the momentum going then. And the words are still there and supporting, but the literalness kind of falls out a little bit, and it becomes more of poetic or metaphorical. And some of the things, like some of those choices on, like, Christie went first, they made sense. We tried them different ways. Like, there's just some things that, yes, you need to go first, and it wasn't really a question. It was just for this topic, I want to confront, like, what my role is and where my place is, and how we demonstrate that with our bodies, and that can read through by waiting, by listening, by where you situate yourself.
So one question was asked last night as well, and I'll push that question again. So you're going to do it again tonight. Let's say you do it again tonight. Would there be significant change, a little change? In other words, your score is there, but would it feel differently, and would there be different movement choices if you did it tonight?
How much time do we have to work on it?
You're asking about you'd work on it again before?
I'm just wondering if we have time or not.
Okay. Because for an observer, if you go to a sort of a typical dance concert, it's choreographed, it's scored. Now let's say you do your duet again. Will it be different a little bit differently than what I saw last night?
I think the timing would be different. I think our emotional reactions would probably change more and more and more. But honestly, I think a lot of what we have is pretty set.
Last night there was this one moment where we both chose to move forward, and we hadn't talked about that. I don't know if that'd be there or not. It was before we had the screening. We've been working together for over a year and improvising together, so I think that we also had like a nice sense of how to respond a little bit. But it was interesting, we were crawling forward and we just kind of knew that we're going forward, all right. Then we stopped.
So if anything, there'd probably be more sprinkles.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the juxtaposition with the video and with the sound and the violence that we were seeing and the two of you, it was very, very powerful moments, a lot of powerful moments throughout the piece. One thing that really captured me was that someone asked last night too that there's a moment where you're on the floor, absolutely still, and you're next to her and beginning to just to smoothen the skin of your partner. And it said so many things to me about relationships, not of all kinds, but that silent, physical, embodied moment of skin on skin said this is where we'd love to be sometime, love to get there. And one thing about performance, of course, you've got 60 people watching and everybody's doing their own interpretation of what you're doing, right? But there was a lot of simplicity in what you did last night, but simplicity is very hard to pull off as performers. And it was because it was clean, it was clear, so a lot of things were said to us through your bodies. A lot of dialogue was being said to us as well as to each other. I don't know if I'm capturing that, Asha. I don't know how you felt the same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really liked because on the screen it was like, black people being hosed down, dogs being thrown at them, and it impacted you a lot. So then you like passed out from it, like almost died. And then Colleen was like consoling you in that part. Just that got me. I was like, wow. Like it just kind of shows like just the impact on racism has on black people. It just hurts you to your core that it makes you feel like you're almost dead. And then you try to like revive her and take care of her. You slowly came back.
But I kind of ended up getting up by myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
I find we spent kind of a lot of time talking about that moment, I feel like. Originally, it was kind of a question on like sharing body work, actually. And we were like, we can make this simpler. In the back of my head, really, like some of the work and like thinking that I've been doing has been about like all the different forms of weightlessness that we see. Whether it's like a person dead on the street or a person sleeping, just that like weight and succumbing, and like I think that's something that I was maybe trying to evoke. And then also I think we brought it back to like taking care to take care. And that's something that we talked about on our drive here, I think, as well. And it also came up during the talk as well. And I really love dance because it's a form that you can care more. I feel like it's gentle. It can be more feminine. We live in a capitalistic society. You know, we live in a patriarchal society. Gentleness and care aren't always on the top of the lists. So I felt really appreciative to be able to, I guess, let the audience interpret actually, like, you know, what was I doing? Was I sleeping? Was I dead? I think that was kind of the point.
If you were to really highlight, it's terrible to put it, to reduce it, but what's one thing that you really will remember from this embodied dialogue of the two of you? What's something that's going to be part of you from here on out?
I feel like we were just kind of talking a little bit about that on the way in today. I think there's a lot of joy and passion that I felt from this experience, and importance. There's a lot. We're going to take the drive back to think about our continued efforts and what that looks like a bit more. But it does feel like a beginning.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like an end. It feels like a beginning, and it was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure to be able to be a part of this and to be here and to work together. That was like a dream.
We both wanted that creativity, definitely.
And I think we're both wanting to tackle these issues. We're both wanting to be uncomfortable and learn and change and engage and serve.
And be a little fearless.
Yeah.
You said that to me once. It was life-changing. Yeah. I think also during the dialogue, like, I feel like any group of people that talk about issues of color realizes that, like, there is so much work to be done, so many solutions to be found. And I feel like as artists, like, is doing the work, the performance is doing the work, the dialogue is doing the work, continuing to do the work. So that's been something that's been on my mind. But I guess my main takeaway would be, this is the beginning, we're not finished. And we're still figuring out how to do the work while doing the work. Yeah.
Yeah, I had like somewhat of a similar question because you guys had talked about this being a learning experience. So I was going to ask the biggest lesson you learned from this. So since you had like a lot of self-education and things like that.
Something I'm really sitting on right now is I'm really listening. I'm really trying to like actually be an active listener, not a passive listener. Someone who can create space and ask questions that are just going to help me and open the door a little bit more. Really trying to listen.
I was actually going to say listen as well. Learning experience. I feel like the more I learn, the more I want to listen. I think there's also quite a bit to be said about, like, creating an environment in which you feel safe. Safe space in general. I feel like, I think Colleen and I were able to, like, create that for each other so we could just come to each other as we are with, like, the realness and truth of who we are. I think our whole piece is basically like 100% truth. And I think yesterday we actually talked about like switching the narratives, and the other group ended up switching the narratives, and it was hard for the person of color to switch the narrative, and as far as the person of color being, you know, the oppressor, the white person being the oppressed. So I feel like our piece lives and breathes in truth, which I really love.
Well, last night at the end of the, or at the beginning, at the end of the Q&A afterwards, you talked about speaking your truth to all of us. You were saying that, and to know your truth. And that's a challenging journey, but the two of you helped open those doors a little bit wider. And so we want to thank you very much for that. And so I hope that this embodied dialogue continues, and continue to share it so that everyone can get into the dialogue, to be listeners and to be truth speakers. So thank you very much.
Can I circle back real quick before we finish?
Sure.
I felt like there's something, like when we're talking about the body work portion, that I remember a conversation that was really important to me, and I'd like to share that. I remember a conversation where we were talking about seeing black bodies and white bodies interact in a tender, loving, caring way, showing compassion, that like there was something important about like having that, and then also in a performance sense displaying that. That when we had that conversation, it just was huge to me, and I was like, I want more images of love and care, and to be conscientious of a white body and a black body, and to share that, those moments together, that I think that our society needs more media that displays that, more images, more, that in the conversation, it just kind of made me think about what I'm seeing in the world and what I'm noticing, and so I just wanted to offer that a little bit more around the body work, because it felt like an important conversation to me.
It's really crazy how our bodies are the thing that divides us and keeps us connected, honestly. Just to go off what you said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sitting here with three young women who are going to have a conversation with me about the experience with issues of color. It's more than black and white, embodied dialogue. I'm Bob Larson, retired from the theater program at Luther, and so if you'll introduce yourselves.
I am Viola Niyizigama, junior here at Luther College.
I'm Abby Grinager. I'm a junior here at Luther College.
And I'm Asha, BSU president and junior here.
And last night, Viola and Abby, you were part of the issues of color. It's more than black and white, embodied dialogue. So can you share with us a bit how you got involved with this process?
Yeah. So Jane, the dance professor here, so I'm a dance major, and I work closely with Jane, and she brought this piece of work and was like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And I was like, I would love to. And then I asked Viola to be my partner, and she said yes.
Yeah. I've taken 2 dance classes with Jan, and I love dancing, and I think it's a way to express yourself and be free with who you are. So like when she asked me, I was like, yes, I would love to do this.
So you began the process, of embodied dialogue, issues of race, of black and white. So what were some of the initial conversations, initial feelings that were happening as you began your collaboration?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say there wasn't much conversation to begin with. We kind of just jumped in and started doing what the cards said, and but Abby kept pushing to understand why we were doing this and like why we were doing certain movements versus the other. And every time we stopped to talk about it, because I told her that every word on each card is not just a simple word. And every time we stopped to talk about it, we would switch things up. Yeah, so that's how it was for me.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I really wanted to understand as much as possible what other people go through and try and just be open and listen to Viola and her story. And yeah, just really wanting to try and understand what they go through.
Could you maybe provide an example for someone who doesn't know what you're talking about, like with cards and so on? Could you sort of provide an example of this guidance you were given to shape your duet?
Yeah, so the first card that we had, that we chose, so Jane has a directography of these 9 cards with little phrases on them. And so the one that we chose to do first, it had embrace, turn 2 times, slide down the body of your partner while looking into their eyes. And she came up with this by just watching her 2 little boys interact. So we followed that, and some of the cards had some movements that you wouldn't think necessarily would have like racial issues behind them, but with this piece it really brought that to attention.
How was that unearthed for you? How did the multifaceted layers of those words, how did you unearth that? How did you talk about that?
Well, for me, we would read the cards, the words, and we would do it, and she would ask, is this what you want to do? Is this how you feel the words are, have the meaning to? Is this the way is this the way you would interpret them? And that's where the dialogue came in, and I would tell her, no, this and this experience, this, and that. That's how we came up with our performance.
Movement phrase and so on.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys could talk a little bit more about your piece, because like in the other one, Christie and Colleen, there was a lot of Christie's experiences that she had and she turned into dance. Was it the same for you? Was it random?
Yeah.
So we did 8 out of the 9 cards, and so it's just because when we were reading them, we're like, oh my God, we have to do this one. We have to do this one. It was just like, it was speaking to us in a way that we felt needed to be shared. So it wasn't necessarily all my experience, but rather the experience of many others as well. And so we took that into consideration, and some of the cards were personal to me.
Yeah.
Same thing?
Yeah. Some were really specific and some were more general.
Yeah.
So did you find that as you were moving, as you were tasting and embodying those words, and then more dialogue, actual dialogue floated up from that? I mean, I think, share a bit more about how you embodied the words and then the words spoke differently.
It wasn't through the movement. It was reading them, and I write. I like to think that I write poems.
She does great poems.
Yeah,
What?
you do write poems.
And like with every word that I was reading, I was seeing something different. If I saw like create space for the body to move in, and I thought like being trapped in a society or being given freedom in a society, and so it was just through reading the words and putting meaning to them, and Abby asking, how would you put this into an embodied dialogue to provide to others. So
I think it was cool because we balanced each other out. Like I got more from the movement, and she, by me doing the movement and her explaining what the words meant to her, it really just fit really well together.
I know during the question and answering session, both of you guys had talked about being open and vulnerable, and I think it was you, Viola, who said like we need to take whatever's in this space out there to like other parts of campus. I was wondering if you guys had any ideas on how we can do that, or how do you vision it?
You were talking about it too last night after everybody had left, that we want to continue the dialogue that was happening in the room, continue those like conversation with the people that were there, because as somebody, I don't remember who said it, but they said that it's always the same people coming to these events, and they're not wrong. And so like even then, how do we continue that conversation and build up with those same people to be able to bring it to the others? And so we were like, we don't know how to go about that. We don't know where to start to create that space for people to continue those conversations.
Yeah.
In a way, you kind of pointed in one direction, Abby saying that you moved to the phrase and the words, but Viola opened the word up differently for you.
Yeah.
So you were physically responding, but then as a poet / dancer, which is terrific, you were saying, but for me, that word has a different tinge to it. It has a different flavor to it. And so you were learning, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were learning something about her perspective then very clearly.
Yeah, I was. I was. She gave me her experience, and I was so grateful that she did and helped me understand what these words were. And then me personally, I love to dance, and dancing is a way that I can try and understand what people go through by moving, and so it really opened up conversation. And I think as we progressed through this process, we got closer and got more comfortable with each other. I mean, we'd known each other before, but I think it brought us closer together.
I was hoping you guys could touch upon the scene where you were on the window, and then you were like at the bottom window. Like, talk more about that. Like, was this supposed to mean something symbolically to you? How did you want others to interpret it?
Yeah. So last year I was involved in soil turning, which was a piece about identity. And one of the girls, she was born with, I think, 4 thumbs, and so she had surgery to remove those thumbs, and so her piece was all about the hands, and she was standing up on the windowsill. And so I kind of took inspiration from that, and the line that was for that movement was hands behind back. which I think is a powerful phrase. So I wanted people to see how powerful that could be. Yeah.
Yeah, that phrase, hands behind back, is kind of, like I said, I'm reading to the words, like being chained and not being able to do anything. And hence why, I don't know if you noticed it, I like fought against myself and broke the chain. And I think the phrase before that one was like, do something, somebody do something.
Yeah.
And I was running around looking at the audience and kind of asking someone to do something, and nobody did. And so I had to go to the window and do something, and said, oh, someone. So, and then with me, I started off strong, but I don't know if you noticed, eventually I got tired. And when I put her down, she kind of pushed me away. So, yeah.
Abby, you said that in the dialogue you moved and then you would hear from Viola or someone. And maybe it's too obvious a question, but what if your partner were white?
It would be a completely different experience, I think, because they wouldn't have the same story and history as Viola. They don't go through the same experiences. It's a completely different world. And so for me, doing this piece was a way to try and just for a moment be in that world and experience. That was our kind of inspiration. We wanted to flip it and show other white people what it might be like if we were the ones being oppressed.
Do you guys think you learned a lot from this piece? About yourselves, about others?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely shared some things that I haven't shared before. And I think it was Christie who was talking about self-care. And at the end of the day, care for yourself. And we don't really know, like, we don't really look at the burden that we carry every day on top of, like, classes, being in activities, and dealing with, like, the things that we deal with. And, like, being Black and female, that adds on to it. And so, like, caring for yourself before you can care for others.
There's a whole layer of dimensions there too. I mean, the other question I would have for either one of you, how would the dynamic change for you if your partner were male? It's one of these rhetorical questions. You can't answer that question in one sense, can you?
No.
But gender would perhaps have an influence, would it not, as well?
Yeah. I think it would have a really impactful difference. And just thinking about whether that male would be white or whether that male would be Black. And it's just, for me, it's really interesting to think about. And like, if I imagine doing what we did with the male and trying to see what the audiences or people who are watching, what their reaction would be, would really be interesting to me to see. And see if that sparks conversation or, yeah.
What do you both hope that the audience took away from last night's performance?
I hope they took away that there are people on campus that really care that we have the ability to create safe spaces, and that we should continue to engage in this dialogue and continue to work towards bettering or, making the situation better. So I hope there's a sense of hope that people feel.
I would agree with that. There are people out there that are willing to do something, take action, and care for them. And for the non-colored people in the room, I hope that they took out that there are people of color out there who are willing to share and have them in their world to be on the same journey. So.
We were talking to your other duet earlier. They are both out of college and out in a wider perspective at this point. But what you just mentioned, Viola, is that sometimes Caucasian folks turn to you or to Asha for answers. Help me. Help me do it. And what you just said is saying, hey, let's open the world up a little bit more and invite everybody into that world, and not saying, teach me, but let's listen to one another. I mean, that's kind of what I hope you're going to be writing some of this now in your poetry, right? I'm serious. I'm challenging you to put some of this down now, and so that you can share it even further. So, would you like to do this again someplace? Would you like to repeat this on campus at another point, and hope a different audience shows up?
I would do it in a heartbeat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, I don't know when it's supposed to happen. There's a TED Talk at Luther. It's going to be happening.
Yeah.
Might be spring semester.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you'll be here then.
I won't
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah.
But it should be a yearly thing. So it'd be interesting if you guys would be able to perform and then talk about the work that went into the performance, what it meant.
Yeah. So I'm in a dance class right now. It's Happenings Experimental Research. It's a dance class. And it looks at the avant-garde period in the U.S. with arts. And I've really...
What time period is that?
It's like 1960s, 70s, 52 to 72. And they used art as a way, like they politicized art. And so what I've thought would be interesting and maybe a way to bring it to other people who might not come to these things is just to do it in like library lawn or in the Union where there's a bunch of people there.
Like chapel.
Like, chapel, and see what people's responses are. And so I would love to do this again.
But Asha also put a seed for me about next year will be your senior year. Come back and repeat this. Not repeat it, but come back and develop a new score based on another year of your own experiences, another year. But here you two are, embodied young women who are asking questions, seeking answers, and now joining up again to so next year you make sure you put it on the calendar, and I'll be there to watch it to see. Are you going off campus second semester?
I am. I'm going to Uganda for this spring.
Terrific.
Yeah.
All right.
You have whole new experiences there.
Oh
Exactly. So is there are many things you've already alluded to it, but is there a particular idea or feeling or emotion that is going to stay with you for some time that emerged out of this experience?
For me, somebody said at the last night that people show up to the things that they care about.
Mhm.
That's Asha's
Mm.
line. And, and last night I was pretty disappointed with some people, and so I guess what I want to do is to be able to bring these issues to people like that know that it's happening but don't want to do anything about it, but to also know that there are people out there that do care and are taking action with me. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, yes, it does, it does. There's work to be done still,
Yeah.
and you want that work to be shared and out there.
Yeah, I think going from last night and hearing what you had to say about being in class and having no one speak up for you, now I feel like I can. Like, I don't have to wait for the other person to speak up. I can do it with them, not for them, but with them.
Yeah, because my fear was, in that class, like Viola knows me, I'm going to say what's on my mind regardless, but what if there was somebody in that class that wasn't me, that had the same experiences and didn't have somebody to talk up for them?
Yeah.
Because that would feel awful.
Yeah.
I felt awful, and I still said something, but to
Yeah.
feel that bad about yourself and then having nobody speak up for you, and you can't speak up for yourself is another layer. How do you guys think we can get rid of that here at Luther?
About not being able to speak up for yourself?
Having
or-
more allies / accomplices. I don't know if you guys have heard that term yet, but I think Viola might have because I watched the video. But having them do more of the work instead of expecting like the black students at Luther to do it.
I think we just have to engage in more dialogue. And as a part of this process, Jane sent out some articles about how to be an ally, specifically a white ally. And those were really, really great articles to read. And I should go back and refresh my memory of them because I read them when she first sent them out, which was a while ago. But I think it's really, learning other ways and how we can help each other out. So I think learning how to is what we need.
I mean, I guess something I will add on to that is that it's going to take work, and it's not going to happen overnight. So patience, being patient throughout the whole thing is very important. To be able to stay true to yourself and carry out the work that you're doing is very important.
This is a question that sometimes James asks me. So I'll ask you. What gives you joy? What gives you joy in this process?
Like I said before, I love dancing. Anyone who knows me knows I love dancing, and so being able to put more, to put a message to that dancing, and speak truth in the form that I know best is what brings me joy, and of course writing poems.
I would have to agree with that. I love to dance, and putting a message to it, but also building more of a connection, and doing it with someone is really special.
But what I would like to see, I love that we worked together and we knew each other ahead of time, and although we hadn't talked to each other as often as we should have, it was really nice to get together in those times and build our friendship. But what I would also like to see is strangers doing this, people who don't know each other. Like, how would they do this, and how will they, express themselves to strangers working together?
That would require great vulnerability on a lot of people's part, and to witness that too. I mean, it's important for us, Asha and I last night, we were a witness to your journey, and we found we may have interpreted things differently because of who we are, but we still found a common possibility for dialogue because of what you embodied. And that's what we're talking about, this embodied dialogue.
Yeah. I think so I've been working with Jane throughout the semester, and she had invited people from the cities to come and do the work. And someone mentioned this, Colleen I think said some people didn't know who to ask. And so for me, like, I named a few individuals, but it also made me reflect on like who my friends are and like the proportion of white versus black, or Caucasian versus like international students, and so it made me think of how can I continue to build the relationships I have with international students, African American students that I have and yet that I don't have.
And Viola, you also said that the movement for you is moving, and dancing is, it's hard to be inauthentic. You have to speak the truth in your bodies too, as well as with your words. And you both did that very effectively last night, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask about the articles that were handed at the beginning then. If it was the groups, like the duets idea, or was it Jane's idea? And what do you hope the audience took away from that?
Yeah, I think it was Jane's idea. Because I didn't know they were going to be handed out, but I thought it was great that they were. And I hope they learned something from those articles.
Yeah, because Dear White America, George Yancey piece. I know we had read about his reflections, and we were in Christian ethics together, and the backlash you received is intense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, all three of you. I mean, I'll just say that as an elder in the community, when I have an opportunity to listen and to witness, to hear Asha and Abby and Viola, it gives me hope. Because right now we live in a world in which, to me as an elder, hope seems small now compared to what it used to be. And so it renews the sense, and I hope other elders will see that as well, the power of the three of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.